Hello, everyone, and welcome to our meal planning during a pandemic webinar. My name is Lisa Lindquist, and I am the chef at Revive Wellness and My Viva Plan. I'm really excited to present this webinar because it's actually one of my favorite topics. Meal planning has had a lot of significance and impact on my life personally, so I love that I have the opportunity to share the tools that I've found useful for myself with you guys. So let's jump in. So in my presentation today, obviously the main theme is meal planning, but connected with that, I do want to touch on some food safety and prioritization around, using ingredients that need using first and how to incorporate that into meal planning. And then I want to kind of move into talking about leftovers and batch cooking and how to incorporate those into your leftovers, and then the concept of repurposing your leftovers. So we'll go into more detail on that shortly. I think it's important to start by focusing on your why. So that means I think you should sit down and maybe reflect on your challenges that you're facing and how meal planning can help you. So I'll share with you what my why is. I love cooking and I love being in the kitchen. It brings me a lot of joy. It always has, it always will. But before I started meal planning, thinking about mealtime was actually kind of a source of stress for me. I never knew what I was going to make, how long meal prep was going to take, what time meals were going to be ready. And I guess I just generally felt uninspired. On top of that, I felt a lot of pressure to figure out how to use the ingredients in front of me in my fridge and in my pantry, how to combine them in a way that would make, a delicious meal in a reasonable amount of time. And it just felt like a puzzle that I had to figure out, and I constantly felt like I was struggling, and sometimes I even felt like I was failing. And so I just felt very uninspired around mealtime. So once I started meal planning, it helped me to feel like I was more in control, and it just drastically reduced the mental burden of meal preparation and actually helped me to look forward to meal times again. I was actually able to think ahead in my day and think about what was coming for dinner and look forward to it. I was able to make a plan and pull meats out of the freezer to thaw the night before. So I really felt on top of it, and I felt more inspired again. So I really encourage you to start by sitting down and really thinking about what your challenges are around meal preparation and how meal planning can help you. And framing that around the pandemic that we're facing right now, first off, our outings are limited right now. So that means when we do go out for essential items like groceries, we need to be purposeful and we need to be intentional. So that means having a meal plan and having a grocery list and being focused is really important. But that being said, we're all aware that there are food shortages right now, and that adds a certain level of stress and uncertainty to the experience of going out. So that means we need to be flexible. We need to be able to adapt in our plans, and I will go over some strategies on how to do that and how to be prepared. So, does meal planning feel overwhelming to you? And if the answer to that is yes, then that is perfectly normal and totally okay to feel that way. Anybody who I've ever talked to about meal planning that has adopted it into their life said that at first it felt overwhelming. It felt like an obstacle to overcome and just didn't know where to start. And that is completely normal. Anytime that we're bringing something new into our life and trying something new, it definitely can feel overwhelming. So, but I want to reassure you that meal planning can be as simple or as complicated as we want to make it. So, I'm going to share with you some tools that will hopefully make it easier for you, and hopefully, you can even have a little bit of fun with it. So, where to start? Whether we're facing a pandemic or not, I think it's important to start by taking an inventory of what you have on hand. So, everything counts here. We have a tendency of overlooking things like flour, sugar, oil, spices, those kinds of things, but we can use all of those things to cook delicious things. So, it's really important to still, look at those items as well. It helps us to have a better picture of what's in front of us and helps us to really see if there are any items that need to get used right away that need our attention immediately. um, and it helps us to also see if we're low on anything, or conversely if we have an abundance of anything. So obviously, if you're low on anything, you'll know to restock on that item if it's something you use. But an abundance is also important to see because it doesn't matter if you have a large pantry or a small pantry. Often things get kind of pushed to the back and we don't see them and we forget that they're there. And I've been guilty of this too, where I go to the store thinking I was out of something and I bought something and came home and realized I already had a bunch of it already. So we don't want to be contributing to food shortages. So it's really important to have a look at everything we have in front of us. And keeping food safety in mind here as well. So you want to be checking your best before dates on all of the foods in your fridge as well as your canned goods. You want to evaluate, the freshness of everything that you have in front of you so that you can prioritize using the older items first. And any produce that you might see that is starting to maybe wilt a little bit, then you'll know to use those first. And this kind of goes without saying, but I want to say it anyway. So do not eat expired food. I'm certainly not encouraging wasting food right now, and that's something to be aware of course. But we also can't risk illness right now, and we don't want to be putting a strain on our healthcare system. So, very important to prioritize food safety, prioritize our health right now. Freezing foods is a great tool that you can use for preserving foods that you may feel like you can't get through in time before they're going to go bad. And the general rule behind freezing foods is that they can be frozen once in the raw stage and once after cooking. So basically, you just have to remember to not refreeze foods that have already been thawed, whether it's a raw ingredient or something that's been cooked and frozen and then thawed. You don't want to be exposing foods to a wide range of temperatures because that just invites some bacterial growth, and obviously that's not what we want. 2-hour rule is another one to keep in mind, and that is just that perishable foods cannot be left in the danger zone for more than 2 hours. And the danger zone is 4 to 60 degrees Celsius. And room temperature, of course, falls in that range. So keep that in mind, and that does apply to some foods you might not think of, like cut fruits and vegetables. So if you've made a fruit platter or a salad or a vegetable platter, just make sure to put those in the fridge within that 2-hour time range. Now, precautions around COVID-19 are something to keep in mind as well. I do want to put here, though, that the CDC and Health Canada has actually stated that there's no evidence that food is a likely source or a route of transmission for COVID-19. So that's great news, and we can take comfort in that. But that being said, we always want to keep safe food handling in mind. And when we're handling our fresh produce, we always want to be washing it with cold running water. Doesn't matter if it has a peel on it or not that you're going to be eating. And um, and as an added layer of precaution, you can buy, fruits and vegetables that may have a peel that you're not going to eat. You still want to wash those items, of course, but things like bananas or citrus fruits or melons, those kinds of things, if you wash them first, then take the peel off, then it kind of adds an extra layer of safety for you. So now I want to talk about prioritizing food usage. Maybe you've gone through your cupboards now and your fridge and you've seen a few items that you need to use first. So I want to just give you some recipe ideas here to use some of those items. And you don't even necessarily need a recipe because they're very versatile and you can use different ingredients in different ways here. So these are all found on MyViva Inc. And we'll have access to these recipes after for you. But just generally speaking, frittatas, omelets, quiches, any of those egg-based dishes are great for using any produce that you may need to use up. So this one uses asparagus and some tomatoes, and then it uses canned salmon, which is a great pantry item. But you can use whatever vegetables you have on hand that really need to get used. So that's a great way to use that up. Stir fries are another great one. You can use virtually any vegetable and any protein here. And you really don't need even a recipe for this. You can really kind of combine them together, add whatever Asian sauces you have in your fridge, and you have a stir fry. Curries are another great example. This one uses chickpeas, which is another great pantry item. There's sweet potatoes in there, which actually do keep quite long in your cupboard. But you can, again, switch out your produce for whatever needs using up, and it's a great way to use those up. Now, making the most of your leftovers. This is a great tool to reduce that burden of feeling the need to cook all the time. So there's a few different ways we can do that. Before I get into that, I want to talk a little bit about how long leftovers last. I'm not going to get into details here on this slide, but the main takeaway here is that leftovers, generally speaking, are going to last about 3 to 4 days in your fridge. So keep that in mind. If you have leftovers that are a bit more high risk, and by that I mean generally seafood or mixed dishes that have a lot of ingredients in them, those you want to be sure to use up within 2 days or 48 hours. So just keep those in mind. Now, batch cooking is a great way of utilizing leftovers. So you're going to put your work in up front and make a large batch of something, like a lasagna is a great example. And there's some other examples here for you as well. Make a large batch, and then you can cut it into portions and freeze those portions to pull out of the freezer for a later time. So you don't feel like you're necessarily making one lasagna and eating it all week and getting kind of bored of it and having the same thing over and over. You can make it, have it for a meal, and freeze the leftovers in portions, and then add it into a rotation for a meal coming up in a few weeks. So then you know already that that is something off of your plate later on. So that can be really, really helpful. Another tool I like to use with batch cooking is making a large portion of just a single ingredient and using them over the course of a few days, but just switching up how you flavor them. So I've used steamed carrots as an example here. If you steam a large volume of carrots on day one, then season it on the day one with butter, lemon juice, and dill. Day two, olive oil, cumin, and coriander. Day three, chili powder, garlic powder, and cayenne. These are just some examples. You can use whatever herbs and spices you have on hand that are inspiring to you. But it's just another great example of doing the work up front. You're still having carrots 3 days in a row, but they're flavored so differently every day that you're still managing to keep it interesting for yourself. And I mentioned before the importance of having a backup plan and being flexible. So anytime we're doing a meal plan, you want to be thinking ahead as much as possible. Think of ways that you can use your leftovers, do batch cooking, use what you have on hand, all of those things, and go into the store with a plan. But there's two ways that I think are important to be able to be flexible. So number one is looking at the recipes you have planned out and looking at them critically. So that means you want to look at certain ingredients and determine if there are some that you can either eliminate altogether if the store doesn't have it in stock, or if there's something you can substitute for it instead. So a great example is if you have a recipe that calls for shallots, and this depends on the recipe, of course, but if you were to go in the store and they didn't have shallots, you could either eliminate it, maybe, or you could substitute it for a red onion or a white onion or something like that, and it would probably still turn out great. So just look at your recipes and decide if there are any ingredients that you could just completely eliminate. The other tool that I like is to have a backup plan. So have some of those back pocket recipes ready to go that don't necessarily need specific ingredients. You can use kind of whatever you have on hand, or you can grab whatever you see at the store that might work. So here are some examples. Charcuterie, and I've put that in quotation marks because people always think that charcuterie is something that's, fancy that you get in a restaurant, but it really doesn't have to be. So if you have any kind of cheese on hand, crackers, fruits, nuts, seeds, any of the above, if you combine them and put them on a plate, that can be a dinner one night. Breakfast for dinner is another example where you don't need a lot of extra ingredients. You can use what you have on hand. Everything but the kitchen sink soup. Soups are a great dish to just put whatever you have into them, and they always work out. Nachos can be another fun one. You can use black beans, you can use canned corn, you can use salsa, things you already have on hand. Omelets, and I already mentioned all those egg-based dishes. Use whatever produce you have on hand or whatever is inspiring to you in the grocery store when you're there. So good to have those ready to go as a backup plan in case, despite our best efforts, our plan doesn't work out. And that does happen sometimes. So don't feel bad about that if it does happen. It's happened to us all. Now I want to talk about repurposing leftovers, which is a really cool way of reducing the burden of cooking. So it helps you to keep your meals interesting and less repetitive. And the basic um, concept behind repurposing leftovers is that you cook a meal on the first day and then turn it into something different the next day using the same meal and sort of you're you're only cooking once, but you're using it in a completely different way the next day. So it helps you to think resourcefully and get creative. And of course, it reduces that burden that you might feel, so you don't feel like you need to constantly be coming up with new meals every day. And then the food waste is a huge one here, too. If we're keeping our meals interesting and being creative with them, we're more likely to eat them. And so we're not going to be wasting as much food. So here's some examples for you. So roast chicken, you can either make it at home or buy a rotisserie chicken if they have them at the store. And on the first night, you would just have it as your roast chicken dinner with whatever sides you want. And then you want to take the leftover meat off the bones, refrigerate them, and then the next day turn it into a chicken quesadilla. And so two totally different meals here, but you really only did the work, the night before. Quesadillas come together in minutes, so very easy. And there's a whole list of other things you can do with the leftovers there as well. Pulled pork is another great option. So day one, have it as a pulled pork sandwich. And then for day two, you take the leftover shredded pork, put it on a taco shell, and top it with whatever toppings you want, some salsa, some black beans, whatever you have, and you have an entirely different meal with very different flavors going on. Meatloaf is another example. So make it as a traditional meatloaf in a loaf pan, or what I like to do sometimes is put it into a muffin tin, and so you automatically have them pre-portioned into individual portions that can be frozen or used for your um, meal the next day. So you have it on day one as a meatloaf with your sides, and then day two you want to crumble some of that up, mix it with some tomato sauce, and then you have your spaghetti bolognese. So again, two very different meals, and are a whole list here of other options you can do. So those are some examples for you, and there's so many other ones you can do. So anytime you're trying to plan out your meals for the week, think with this kind of brain where you can repurpose them and keep them interesting. If you would like to receive a resource summarizing the information from this presentation and to get some tips and recipes, the ones that I mentioned, please text meal planning to 555-888. That concludes my webinar today. I really hope you enjoyed the presentation and that I was able to provide you with some useful information and some tools that you can use in your life. I really enjoyed presenting this topic today, and I just wanted to thank you for listening in. Please visit myvivainc.com to tune in to some more webinars that are coming shortly, and I really hope that you can join us for those. Thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.